The inheritance wasn't exactly a windfall. An old lighthouse, perched precariously on a jagged spit of land called Blackwood Point, miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a winding, often treacherous coastal road. My great-uncle Thomas, a man I'd met maybe twice in my life, had been the keeper there for 50 years. Apparently, solitude suited him. Now, it was mine. Along with a stack of unpaid property taxes and, according to the lawyer's cryptic letter, certain responsibilities outlined within. My plan was simple: fly out, secure the place, meet with a realtor, and list it. I wasn't the lighthouse keeper type. I liked reliable Wi-Fi, neighbors I could borrow sugar from, even if I never did, and the comforting drone of city life. Blackwood Point offered none of that. The drive out confirmed my apprehension. The road narrowed, cracked asphalt giving way to gravel, then packed dirt. The trees grew dense, old-growth monsters draped in moss, blocking out the sun. Finally, the forest spat me out onto the headland. The lighthouse stood stark against a bruised purple twilight sky, a stone sentinel against the relentless gray churn of the Atlantic. It was taller than I expected, and the attached keeper's cottage looked small and hunched against its base, like a child clinging to its parent's leg. Getting out of the rental car, the wind hit me first, cold, damp, carrying the briny tang of the ocean and something else, a faint, underlying smell of decay, like old, wet stone. The air was heavy, the silence broken only by the crash of waves against the rocks below and the mournful cry of gulls. The key the lawyer sent, heavy and ornate brass, turned stiffly in the cottage lock. Inside, it was like stepping back 50 years. Furniture draped in white sheets, dust motes dancing in the slivers of light piercing the grimy windows. The air was thick with the smell of disuse, mildew, and that same faint decay. It was cold, colder than it should have been for early autumn. I spent the first hour just exploring the cottage. Kitchen, small living area, a cramped bedroom, a bathroom with rust-stained fixtures. Everything functional, but bare bones. Uncle Thomas hadn't been one for creature comforts, it seemed. A steep, narrow spiral staircase led up into the tower itself. Climbing it, the air grew even colder. The stone walls felt clammy. Halfway up, a small wooden door led to a storage room. Inside, more dust, old barrels, coils of rope, and a heavy wooden chest tucked in the corner. Locked, of course. I made a mental note to find the key later. At the top, the lantern room was a cage of glass and iron, offering a dizzying 360-degree view of the darkening sea and the forbidding coastline. The great lens assembly dominated the center, surprisingly clean compared to the rest of the place. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting weak, yellow light. On a small, built-in wooden desk, beneath a layer of dust, sat a thick, leather-bound volume. A logbook. Curiosity overriding my desire to just get settled and call the realtor, I picked it up. The leather was cracked and worn smooth in places. Opening it, the pages were brittle, filled with neat, spidery script spanning decades. Uncle Thomas's handwriting. Most entries were mundane. Weather observations, shipping traffic, maintenance notes. Replaced Wick Assembly, October 17, 1978. Gale force winds from northeast, January 9, 1985. Repaired crack in outer pane, Sector 4, July 22, 1993. But then, the entries started to get strange. Interspersed with the routine were passages that spoke of more than just weather and ships. September 14, 1981, fog thick as wool tonight. Heard the tapping again. Comes from the glass, but nothing there. Must keep the light burning bright. It deters them. Deters who? Or what? I flipped further. November 3, 1989, saw one in the surf at low tide. Just a glimpse. Long limbs. Wrong angles. The light kept it off the rocks. Praying for clear skies. August 29, 1997, the Foghorn jammed. 3 hours of darkness and silence before I could fix it. Scratches on the lower tower door this morning. Deep ones. Polished the lens array twice today. Brightness is paramount. A chill, colder than the tower air, traced its way down my spine. This wasn't just the rambling of an isolated old man. There was a consistency, a pattern to the fear beneath the meticulous entries. He genuinely believed something was out there, something repelled by the lighthouse beam. I skipped towards the end, looking for more recent entries. The handwriting grew slightly shakier in the last few years. June 12, 2023, fog hasn't lifted in days. Power flickered twice. Generator running rough. They are close. I hear them whispering in the waves. The light must not fail. July 5, 2023, it's getting harder to keep awake. They call in the fog. Sometimes sound like Eleanor. Eleanor? Was that his wife? I didn't know he'd been married. The final entry was dated 3 months ago, shortly before his death was reported as a heart attack. August 18, 2023, cracked pane in Sector 7. Can't reach it safely. The wind, it doesn't sound like wind anymore. If I don't make it, whoever finds this. Keep the light on. At all costs. Don't let it go dark. Especially in the fog. They hate the light, but they hunger in the dark. Keep the light on. At all costs. I looked up at the giant lens, then out at the rapidly darkening sea. Thick tendrils of fog were beginning to snake in from the horizon, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight. Standard procedure was to activate the light at sunset. According to my phone, that was minutes away. On the wall near the desk was the control panel. Old switches and gauges. Following faded labels, I found the main sequence. I threw the heavy switch. With a low hum, the mechanism began to turn. The powerful beam sliced through the dusk, a blade of white against the encroaching gray. It swept across the sea, momentarily illuminating the churning waves and the jagged rocks below, then swept back towards the land, briefly lighting the dense woods before continuing its rotation. A wave of relief washed over me. Task 1, keep the light on. Done. But the logbook's warnings echoed in my mind. Especially in the fog. The fog was rolling in faster now, a solid, suffocating wall advancing from the sea. Within minutes, it had completely enveloped the point, pressing against the lantern room glass like a living entity. Visibility dropped to 0. The powerful beam of the lighthouse seemed truncated, barely penetrating the oppressive gray shroud just beyond the panes. Then, the rhythmic, deep hump of the foghorn kicked in, automatically triggered by the reduced visibility. Its mournful sound vibrated through the stone structure. It was a lonely, unsettling sound, but also strangely comforting in the disorienting whiteout. Hump. 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 I stood there, watching the beam cut its futile path through the fog, the logbook heavy in my hand. I reread the last entry. The wind, it doesn't sound like wind anymore. Hump. Hump. Silence. The foghorn had stopped. Mid-blast. Just, silence. An abrupt, unnatural void where the sound should have been. My blood ran cold. I strained my ears, listening. Only the distant crash of waves, muffled by the fog. Then, a new sound. Faint at first, but growing. A scraping. Like claws on stone. Coming from below. From the base of the tower. And it was getting closer. My breath hitched. The scraping sound wasn't random, it was rhythmic, deliberate. Like something methodically testing the stone, searching for purchase, climbing. It echoed up the spiral staircase, amplified by the confined space. My hand instinctively tightened on the heavy logbook. Keep the light on. They hate the light. But the light was on, useless against the impenetrable fog. And the foghorn, the sound that should have been blasting, was silent. Panic warred with a primal need to know. Leaving the lantern room felt like abandoning the only safe place, but staying put while that sound crawled closer felt like waiting in a trap. I gripped the heavy brass key, the one that had opened the cottage, remembering the locked wooden door halfway down the stairs. The storage room. Was that a potential refuge? Or another trap? The scraping paused. Replaced by a wet, guttural clicking noise that made the hair on my arms stand on end. It was closer now, maybe just below the trapdoor entrance to the lantern room. My eyes darted to the heavy metal hatch in the floor. Was it bolted from this side? I scrambled over, fumbling with the thick, rusted latch. It was stiff, but it moved. Secured. But for how long? Then, a thump directly beneath my feet, shaking the iron floor grating. Followed by another, harder thump. Something was testing the hatch. The scraping resumed, frantic now, moving around the perimeter of the trapdoor. I backed away, heart hammering against my ribs. I had to get out of the lantern room. The spiral staircase felt impossibly exposed. I needed the storage room key. Where would Thomas keep it? My gaze swept the small desk, the control panel, the walls. Nothing obvious. Then I remembered the heavy wooden chest in the storage room itself. Locked. Maybe the key wasn't for the storage room door, but for the chest inside it. It was a long shot, but it was the only thought I had. I took the bare bulb illuminating the lantern room, unscrewing it carefully. Plunging the top of the tower into near total darkness, save for the rotating beam cutting weakly through the fogged glass, was terrifying, but I needed a light source I could carry. Holding the still warm bulb gingerly, I unlatched the main door leading to the stairs and cracked it open. The scraping stopped instantly. The clicking returned, slower now, more deliberate, directly below the door. It knew I was opening it. Holding my breath, I slipped through the opening and started down the spiral stairs, my socked feet making almost no sound on the cold stone. Each step was agony, my ears straining against the silence, waiting for the scraping to resume from behind me. The weak light from the bulb cast distorted, dancing shadows on the curved walls. Halfway down, I reached the small wooden storage room door. It wasn't locked from the outside. Relief warred with confusion. Why lock a chest inside an unlocked room? I pushed the door open slowly. The smell hit me again, mildew, brine, and that pervasive undertone of rot, stronger here. I stepped inside, pulling the door almost shut behind me, leaving just a crack. The light bulb illuminated the cluttered space, barrels, ropes, old sacks. And in the corner, the heavy wooden chest. It looked ancient, bound with rusted iron bands. The lock was large, brass, and bore the same ornate design as the main cottage key. My fingers trembled as I inserted the heavy key. It turned with a satisfying, solid clunk. Lifting the heavy lid, I shone the weak light inside. It wasn't filled with treasure or old documents. It was filled, almost to the brim, with salt. Coarse, grayish sea salt. And resting on top, nestled in the center, was a small, tarnished silver key. The key to the tower door. No, this was different. Smaller. More intricate. Maybe for the foghorn mechanism. Just as I reached for it, a deafening crash echoed from above. Wood splintered. The storage room door shuddered in its frame. It hadn't come for the trapdoor. It had smashed through the main door at the top of the stairs. Heavy, wet footsteps slapped against the stone, descending rapidly. The guttural clicking was loud now, echoing down the stairwell. It was coming. My eyes darted around the small storage room. No other exit. The chest. It was large, maybe large enough to hide in, buried in the salt. Salt, why so much salt? The footsteps stopped just outside the storage room door. Silence, except for a low, wet snuffling sound, like an animal sniffing under the crack. It knew I was in here. Slowly, deliberately, the doorknob began to turn. My body reacted before my mind caught up. Dropping the weak light bulb, plunging the room into absolute blackness save for the faint line of light under the door, I scrambled backwards, kicking the heavy chest lid shut with a thud. The silver key flew from my grasp, skittering somewhere across the grimy floor. The doorknob finished turning. The door creaked open. A shape filled the doorway, vaguely humanoid but fundamentally wrong. Even silhouetted against the dim light from the stairwell, I could make out limbs too long, joints bending at unnatural angles. The wet snuffling intensified, accompanied by a low hiss that seemed to vibrate in my bones. It paused, sensing the darkness, perhaps orienting itself by smell, that overpowering smell of rot that clung to it, now flooding the small room. My back hit the cold stone wall. Trapped. My eyes swept the floor desperately in the near-total blackness, searching for the dropped silver key, for anything. My hand brushed against the coarse grains spilling from the poorly sealed chest lid. Salt. The entire chest filled with salt. Why? The shape took a hesitant, shuffling step into the room. A long, multi-jointed arm, ending in something like wet, bony claws, extended, feeling the air. The clicking sound started again, sharper now, closer. An image flashed, the logbook entry. Saw one in the surf at low tide. Salt water. Sea salt. Maybe, just maybe. With a surge of desperate adrenaline, I lunged towards the chest, scooping up double handfuls of the coarse salt. The creature reacted instantly to my movement, emitting a high-pitched shriek as it rushed forward. I flung the salt with all my might towards the sound, towards the advancing shape. The shriek cut off into a strangled, sizzling hiss. A sound of intense pain. The creature recoiled violently, crashing against the doorframe. I didn't wait to see more. Dropping to my hands and knees, I swept the floor frantically near where I'd dropped the silver key. My fingers closed around its small, intricate shape. The creature was thrashing now, letting out agonized, wet gurgles. The salt was hurting it, burning it. How long would it last? Scrabbling back towards the chest, key clutched tight, I tried to remember. Where would a hidden lock be? The chest itself was locked with the brass key. This silver one, it wasn't for the chest. I ran my free hand along the cold stone wall behind where the chest sat, feeling for any irregularity, any seam, any keyhole. Nothing. Just cold, damp stone. The creature's thrashing was subsiding, replaced by angry, guttural clicks. It was recovering. My hand moved lower, along the base of the wall where it met the floor, hidden by the chest. My fingers brushed against something small, metallic, recessed into the stone. A keyhole. Tiny, almost invisible in the dark. Heart pounding, I jammed the silver key in. It fit. With a surge of desperate hope, I turned it. A low grinding sound echoed in the small space, not from the wall, but from the floor beneath the chest. The creature shrieked again, lunging forward just as I shoved my shoulder against the heavy salt chest with every ounce of strength I possessed. It scraped agonizingly across the stone floor, moving just enough, maybe a foot, to reveal a dark opening, a square cut into the stone, previously hidden beneath the chest's bulk. A trapdoor leading down. Without a second thought, ignoring the searing pain in my injured shoulder, I threw myself into the opening just as clawed fingers snatched at the back of my jacket, ripping the fabric. I landed hard on a steep, narrow set of stone steps, tumbling down several feet into pitch blackness before catching myself. Above me, the creature shrieked in fury, its distorted shape momentarily silhouetted against the dim light from the stairwell before the heavy chest lid, likely dislodged by my shove, slammed shut over the opening, plunging me back into absolute darkness. I lay there, gasping on the cold, narrow steps, listening. Silence. Had the chest lid trapped it? Or merely blocked the opening temporarily? The air down here was different. Still cold, but drier, with a heavy, earthy smell, like a deep cellar or a cave. How far down did this go? This wasn't part of any lighthouse schematic I could imagine. It felt like I was inside the very foundation, the bedrock of the point itself. Carefully, feeling my way with bruised hands, I started to descend the steep, uneven steps. Where was this passage leading? And what waited at the bottom? The darkness was absolute, swallowing the memory of the weak light bulb I'd held minutes ago. My descent was slow, agonizingly cautious. One hand trailed against the rough-hewn stone wall, feeling its damp chill and occasional sharp protrusions, while the other swept the air before me. The steps were uneven, some shallow, others treacherously deep, slick with a fine layer of dust or grit. The earthy smell intensified, mixing with a mineral tang, like wet clay and rusted metal. Silence pressed in, broken only by my ragged breathing and the scuff of my feet on the stone. How far down was I going? 10 feet? 20? 50? It felt like I was burrowing into the heart of the headland itself. Above, I strained to hear any sound from the storage room, any indication that the creature was still there, trying to get through the trapdoor. Was that a faint scraping? Or just the blood rushing in my ears? My imagination painted horrifying pictures of it forcing the chest aside, its two long limbs probing the opening. My foot met level ground. I'd reached the bottom. I paused, every sense on high alert, listening to the profound silence. Taking a tentative step forward, my foot crunched on loose gravel. It wasn't a constructed room, but the entrance to a natural cave system carved into the rock by millennia of water or some other force. Feeling my way forward, arms outstretched, the space began to open up. The air felt marginally warmer here, less damp. I shuffled forward, one slow step at a time, terrified of unseen drops or obstacles. My hand brushed against something smooth and cold, metal. Following the shape, I identified pipes running along the cave wall, disappearing into the darkness ahead. Large pipes, maybe plumbing or... Then, a flicker. Far ahead, down the cavern path, a faint, intermittent green glow pulsed weakly. It was barely visible, just enough to register against the oppressive blackness. Hope, sharp and unexpected, pierced through my fear. Light meant something. An exit? Equipment? Another person? Drawn towards the glow, I moved faster, stumbling occasionally on the uneven cave floor. The pipes ran alongside me, cold and solid guides in the dark. As I got closer, the green light became steadier, emanating from around a bend in the passage. I also started to hear a low, rhythmic humming sound, accompanied by an occasional clank. Rounding the bend, I stopped dead. Before me was a small, man-made chamber, clearly carved out of the natural cave. Dominating the space was a complex piece of machinery, all brass pipes, gauges, and a large flywheel, humming with latent power. It looked impossibly old, Victorian perhaps, yet strangely functional. Steam hissed faintly from a pressure valve. Pipes snaked from the machine into the rock walls in several directions. And mounted on the wall was a glass gauge, glowing with that faint, sickly green phosphorescence. It took me a moment to understand. This intricate, archaic machine, it had to be connected to the Foghorn. The pipes, the pressure, the rhythmic clank, it was the mechanism. But why was it down here? And why was it silent up there? My eyes scanned the chamber. Old tools lay scattered on a workbench built against one wall, wrenches, oil cans, lengths of copper tubing. Tacked to the wall above the bench was a yellowed, hand-drawn schematic. Even in the dim green glow, I could see it depicted the machine before me, connected via pipes running upwards towards a diagram labeled horn assembly. But something was wrong. A heavy wrench lay on the floor near the main flywheel, as if recently dropped. And one of the primary steam pipes leading upwards had been crudely, violently severed. Steam wasn't just hissing from a valve, it was leaking silently from the jagged break, explaining the lack of pressure to power the horn above. It hadn't jammed. It had been sabotaged. Uncle Thomas couldn't have done this, his last entry spoke of needing the horn. So, who? And why? Then I saw it. Tucked away in the shadow beneath the workbench, almost hidden. A shape. Small, huddled, unmoving. My heart leaped, another person. I took a step closer, calling out softly, "Hello? Anyone there?" No response. I raised my voice slightly. "Are you okay?" Still nothing. Was it a body? Had Uncle Thomas discovered the saboteur? Taking another cautious step, the green light from the gauge cast just enough illumination. It wasn't a person. It was a pile of old, tattered clothing, heavy canvas trousers, a thick woolen jumper, worn leather boots, arranged almost deliberately. And draped over the top, unmistakable even in the dim light, was a long, dark hooded cape. Identical to the ones Winston described finding in his surveillance room years ago. My blood turned to ice. They hadn't just been outside the lighthouse. One of them had been inside. Down here. It had sabotaged the Foghorn. A sudden, echoing clang reverberated from the direction I'd come, the top of the steep stairs. Followed by a triumphant, guttural shriek. The chest lid hadn't held. It was coming down. And I was trapped in a dead-end cave chamber with sabotaged machinery and the discarded clothes of whatever entity haunted this cursed place. The triumphant shriek, sharp and piercing, echoed down the narrow stone shaft, seeming to come from just above. It was followed by the sickening crunch of stone giving way, then the frantic scrabbling of claws finding purchase. It was descending. Fast. There was no time for fear, only reaction. My eyes darted around the small, machine-filled chamber, lit only by the gauge's ghostly green pulse. The heavy pipe wrench felt inadequate. The tools on the bench, hammers, spanners, oil cans, offered little more comfort. The humming machine itself seemed fragile, ancient. The discarded cape lay in a heap, radiating a faint wrongness. The scraping and clicking were loud now, directly overhead, coming down the final stretch of the steep steps. I scrambled backwards, putting the humming foghorn mechanism between myself and the entrance passage. The creature landed on the gravel floor with a heavy, wet thump. It paused in the darkness of the entryway, a hulking silhouette against the blackness, far blacker than the dimly lit chamber. It was different from the one I'd briefly glimpsed upstairs in the storage room. This one seemed broader, heavier, its limbs thicker, though still held at those disturbingly unnatural angles. Twin points of faint green luminescence ignited in the darkness where its eyes should be, fixing on me. It sniffed the air, a low hiss escaping its unseen maw. It began to move, low to the ground like a predator, claws clicking and scraping on the stone floor as it circled, trying to get a clear path around the machine. I backed away, keeping the brass and iron bulk between us, my knuckles white on the handle of the pipe wrench. Its phosphorescent eyes tracked my every move, head tilting with an unnerving, calculating quality. The machine. Could I use it? The severed pipe hissed almost silently, pressure clearly too low for the horn. I glanced at the glowing gauge, the needle hovered just above empty, but there was some pressure left. My eyes fell on a large, rusted manual valve well near the base of the main cylinder. Could I release what little pressure remained? Create a blast? A distraction? The creature decided for me. With a surprising burst of speed, it scuttled around the side of the machine, closing the distance. I swung the heavy wrench in a wide arc. It connected solidly with its extended forearm. A wet, snapping crack echoed through the chamber, like breaking thick, damp branches. The creature let out a gurgling shriek, recoiling violently, its injured limb dangling uselessly, dripping a dark, viscous fluid onto the floor. But the pain only seemed to enrage it. It launched itself forward again, faster this time, ignoring the shattered arm, its fanged mouth open in a soundless snarl. I dodged behind the machine again, my eyes locked on the valve wheel. It looked fused with rust. Dropping the wrench, I grabbed the wheel with both hands, adrenaline surging through me. I heaved, straining until spots danced before my eyes. It wouldn't budge. It was seized solid. A clawed hand scrabbled over the top of the machine, followed by those glowing green eyes. It was climbing over, right above me. Its good arm reached down, bony fingers tipped with wet, black talons grasping for my face. My eyes darted down. The discarded cape. Why leave it? Was it a shed skin? A disguise no longer needed. An image of Winston's story, the figures disappearing leaving only capes, flashed through my mind. What if the cape itself was wrong? Hating myself for the gamble, I snatched up the heavy, musty fabric. As the creature lunged, dropping from the top of the machine towards me, I threw the cape upwards, directly into its face. It shrieked again, a different sound this time, not just pain, but surprise, maybe even recognition. It stumbled backwards off the machine, becoming momentarily entangled in the heavy folds, clawing blindly at its own face. It bought me a second, maybe two. I threw myself at the valve wheel again, planting my feet, using my legs, my entire body. With a tortured, grinding groan of protesting metal, it turned. Just a quarter turn, maybe less, but it was enough. A deafening roar erupted from the severed pipe, not just steam, but a concussive blast of superheated air and pressure, directed sideways into the small chamber. It didn't hit the creature directly as it struggled with the cape, but the sheer force and sudden, violent noise slammed into it like a physical blow. It was thrown backwards, hitting the far cave wall with a sickening, wet crunch. It slid down the stone, tangled in the cape, and lay still. Silence crashed back in, absolute except for the final, dying hiss from the pipe and the low hum of the machine as it wound down, its stored energy spent. The green gauge flickered once, twice, and died, plunging the chamber into near darkness, save for the faint ambient light reflecting off wet stone. Was it dead? Stunned? I fumbled for the wrench I'd dropped, my hand shaking. Approaching cautiously, I strained my eyes in the gloom. The creature lay in a crumpled heap beneath the heavy, dark cape, utterly motionless. Steam, or maybe just dust disturbed by the blast, swirled in the air. I reached out with the wrench, nudging the shape under the fabric. No reaction. Relief, potent and dizzying, washed over me. My legs felt like jelly. I leaned heavily against the now silent machine, gasping, trying to slow my racing heart. I'd survived. Somehow, I'd survived. But as my eyes adjusted to the deeper darkness, and the steam began to dissipate, I noticed the wall where the creature had impacted. The force of the blast, or the impact itself, had done more than just knock it down. It had fractured and dislodged a section of the rock wall, revealing a dark, narrow opening behind it. A fissure, blacker than the surrounding stone, previously hidden. Another passage. An escape route? Or something worse? Where could it possibly lead? Deeper into the rock? Back up towards the surface via some unknown route? And was the thing under the cape truly dead, or just playing possum, waiting for me to turn my back? Staying here felt like madness. The stairs back up led to the storage room, where the other creature might still be waiting. This new passage, it was unknown, but it was away from the immediate horror. A faint draft seemed to emanate from the fissure, cold, but surprisingly fresh, different from the stale, metallic air of the Foghorn chamber and the lighthouse passages. Clutching the heavy pipe wrench, every muscle aching, I made my decision. I took one last look at the still, caped form crumpled against the wall, then turned and squeezed into the narrow fissure, leaving the silent chamber and its dead machine behind. The crack in the rock quickly widened into another natural tunnel, rough-walled and sloping gently, steadily downwards, the fresh draft like a siren's call, pulling me deeper into the uncharted darkness beneath Blackwood Point. The fissure quickly became a proper tunnel, though clearly natural, the rough stone walls smoothed in places by ancient water flow. It twisted, turned, and sloped ever downwards, pulling me deeper into the earth. The draft remained constant, cold but fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and minerals, erasing the metallic tang of the Foghorn chamber. Behind me, the silence felt heavy, pregnant. Was the caped thing truly inert? Or was it already stirring, its unnatural senses tracking me through the rock? Every drip of moisture echoing in the passage sounded like a footstep, sending jolts of adrenaline through my exhausted body. My injured shoulder throbbed with every movement, and my hand, scraped raw from scrambling on the stone, stung fiercely. The pipe wrench felt immensely heavy, an inadequate comfort against the unknown darkness ahead. How far had I descended now? Was I below sea level? The thought was disorienting. After what felt like an eternity of cautious shuffling, the downward slope began to level out. The tunnel widened slightly, the ceiling rising just enough that I no longer had to stoop. The air felt subtly different here, drier, almost still, the guiding draft having dissipated. The floor underfoot also changed, becoming smoother, flatter, less like eroded rock and more like worn flagstones. Man-made? Down here? I paused, listening intently. The dripping sounds were gone. A new sound reached me, incredibly faint, a soft, rhythmic chink, 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 like metal gently tapping stone. It seemed to come from deeper within the tunnel system. And then, another light. Not the sickly green pulse of the gauge, but a warmer, softer glow, flickering slightly, emanating from an opening further down the passage. It cast long, dancing shadows back towards me. Someone was here. Or something. My heart hammered against my ribs. Friend or foe? Given everything else Blackwood Point had thrown at me, optimism seemed foolish. I gripped the wrench tighter, flattening myself against the cold stone wall as I edged closer to the opening, peering cautiously around the corner. It wasn't a large chamber, perhaps 15 feet across, circular, with a low, domed ceiling. The smooth flagstone floor continued here. But the walls, they were covered, floor to ceiling, in intricate carvings. Not letters, not pictures, but complex, interlocking geometric patterns, spirals, and angular symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering light. They felt deeply alien, yet disturbingly intentional. The light source came from several small, primitive-looking oil lamps placed in niches carved into the walls, their flames burning steadily, casting that warm, amber glow. They looked ancient, yet freshly fueled. The rhythmic chink, chink, chink sound was louder here, coming from the center of the chamber. In the middle stood a low, circular stone altar, about waist-high. Its surface was stained dark in patches. And kneeling before it, back towards me, was a figure. Small, hunched, draped in heavy, dark robes similar to the cape I'd found, though these seemed coarser, older. One robed arm rose and fell rhythmically, holding a small, pointed tool, perhaps obsidian or flint, tapping methodically against a smooth, dark stone resting on the altar. Chink, chink, chink. It was adding to the carvings. I froze, hidden in the shadows of the tunnel entrance. Who was this? What were they doing? Were they connected to the creature upstairs? Was this some kind of ritual? The sheer age suggested by the chamber, the machine, the carvings, it felt like I had stumbled into something far older and stranger than just a haunted lighthouse. The figure paused in its work, its head, hidden deep within the cowl of its robe, tilting slightly as if listening. Had it heard me? I didn't dare breathe. The silence stretched, thick and tense. Then, slowly, deliberately, the figure began to turn. It wasn't facing me, but turning towards the altar stone. As it shifted, the lamplight caught the stone it had been carving. It wasn't just a dark rock. It was covered in miniature versions of the same complex symbols that adorned the walls, meticulously etched into its surface. But that wasn't what made my blood freeze. The stone was shaped, unmistakably, like a human skull. Small, perhaps belonging to a child, but undeniably a skull, carved over with those alien patterns. The figure finished its turn, now facing the skull stone directly. It raised both robed arms slowly, the pointed tool still clutched in one hand. A low chant began to issue from beneath the cowl, guttural and sibilant, words in no language I recognized. The air in the chamber grew heavy, charged with static electricity that made the fine hairs on my arms prickle. The lamp flames flickered wildly, casting frantic shadows. The chant grew louder, faster, rising in pitch. The figure raised the pointed tool high above the skull stone. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had to stop it. Whatever ritual this was, whatever power it was invoking, it felt profoundly wrong, dangerous. But as I gathered myself to rush forward, wrench raised, a different sound echoed from the tunnel behind me. Not the wet shuffling of the creature. This was a low, resonant hum, growing rapidly in intensity, vibrating through the very stone beneath my feet. And with it came a wave of nauseating vertigo, as if the world itself was tilting on its axis. The carvings on the chamber walls seemed to pulse faintly in response to the hum, their lines glowing with a fleeting, internal light. The figure at the altar didn't react to the hum, utterly focused on its ritual, the pointed tool poised to strike the skull stone. But I was trapped, the chanting figure before me, the disorienting, power-filled hum growing behind me. Which was the greater threat? And what was causing that impossible sound? The hum vibrating up from the tunnel behind me intensified, pressing against my eardrums, making my teeth ache. The vertigo grew stronger, the flickering amber light of the chamber seeming to warp and twist. Before me, the robed figure ignored the escalating chaos, its guttural chant reaching a fevered pitch. The obsidian tool, clutched tight, trembled high above the carved skull stone, poised for the final, ritualistic strike. There was no choice. The ritual felt imminent, deliberate, a focal point of wrongness. The hum behind me felt vast, ancient, impersonal, a power awakening, perhaps, but not immediately directed at me. The figure was the immediate threat. Stop! My voice was a ragged shout, nearly swallowed by the roaring hum and the figure's escalating chant. It paid no heed. The tool began its descent. Ignoring the nausea that churned in my gut, ignoring the terrifying crescendo building in the tunnel behind me, I surged forward. Adrenaline screamed through me. I swung the pipe wrench, not at the frail-looking figure, but aiming low, at the altar itself, hoping to dislodge the skull stone. My heavy wrench crashed onto the side of the stone altar just as the figure's obsidian point struck the carved skull. The impact jarred my entire arm. The skull stone skittered sideways, knocked askew. The figure's tool missed its intended central point, glancing off the skull's surface with a sharp crack and a shower of faint sparks. Silence. Abrupt, deafening silence. The hum behind me ceased instantly, plunging the chamber back into an unnerving quiet, broken only by the frantic sputtering of the oil lamps. The figure's chant cut off mid-syllable. It threw back its cowled head and let out a long, piercing wail, a sound not of pain, but of pure, unadulterated fury and loss. An utterly inhuman sound that scraped against my nerves. But the chamber wasn't truly silent. A new sound emerged, soft but insistent. A low, rhythmic thump-thump, thump-thump, thump-thump. It wasn't coming from the figure. It was coming from the skull stone lying crookedly on the altar. And the carvings, the intricate symbols covering the walls, they began to glow. Not amber, but a deep, pulsating violet. The lines seemed to shimmer, almost detach themselves from the cold stone, swimming like luminous tadpoles in my peripheral vision. The air grew thick, heavy, tasting of ozone and something metallic, like old blood. The figure's wail subsided into ragged, guttural moans. It scrambled back from the altar, clutching its head. Slowly, it turned towards me. Lamplight flickered beneath the deep cowl, and I finally saw what lay within. Not a face. Just swirling, empty darkness, deeper than any shadow, punctuated by two burning pinpricks of malevolent red light. It raised one robed arm, a long, skeletal finger extending, pointing not at me, but shaking with rage towards the altar, towards the pulsing skull stone. The violet light emanating from the stone intensified, the rhythmic heartbeat growing louder, faster. Thump 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 thump. What had I done? Had I stopped the ritual? Or had I somehow perverted it, completed it in some terrible, unforeseen way? The shadow-faced figure lowered its arm, the red pinpricks fixing on me. A low growl rumbled from the depths of its cowl, a sound that promised retribution. It began to glide towards me, robes flowing strangely, obscuring its feet, the obsidian tool now held low, like a sacrificial dagger. My eyes darted back towards the tunnel entrance. The hum was gone, the disorienting pressure relieved. But what had caused it? And was it truly gone, or merely dormant, waiting? Fleeing back that way felt like plunging into another unknown. Staying here, however, the glowing, heart-beating skull on the altar, the violet light bleeding from the writhing wall carvings, the shadow-faced entity advancing with clear murderous intent, this chamber now felt like the epicenter of the nightmare. As the creature closed the distance, skeletal hand raising the obsidian tool, I noticed something else happening. The smooth flagstone floor around the altar, it wasn't solid anymore. Fine cracks, like spiderwebs, were radiating outwards from the altar's base, glowing faintly with that same disturbing violet energy. The floor itself felt like it was vibrating subtly, in time with the frantic, accelerating heartbeat of the skull. The very ground beneath my feet felt like it was becoming unstable, threatening to shatter. The shadow-faced figure glided closer, obsidian tool held ready. Its movement was unnervingly smooth, unaffected by the increasingly violent vibrations shaking the chamber. The violet cracks in the floor spread like veins of lightning, spitting sparks of purple energy. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the skullstone was a frantic, deafening drumbeat now, echoing the panicked rhythm of my own heart. There was no time to analyze, no time to plan. Retreating back the way I came meant facing the potential return of the clawed creature from the lighthouse passages. Staying meant facing this robed entity on fracturing ground that felt seconds away from total collapse. It lunged, skeletal hand surprisingly fast, the obsidian tool aimed at my chest. I sidestepped, swinging the heavy pipe wrench defensively. The creature twisted with impossible agility, the tool slicing through the air where I'd been a split second before. It didn't seem solid, its robes flowed like smoke, yet the tool it held was undeniably real, sharp. As it recovered, red pinprick eyes fixed on me, I saw my chance. It stood directly over one of the largest violet cracks radiating from the altar. Kicking out, I aimed not at the creature, but at the already weakened flagstone beside it. My boot connected. The stone shattered inwards with a deafening crack, collapsing into a void below. The creature shrieked, flailing as the ground beneath it gave way. One leg plunged into the hole, its unnatural glide momentarily broken. It scrabbled at the edge, skeletal fingers digging into the fracturing stone, the obsidian tool clattering away across the floor. But the collapse was spreading. The entire section of floor around the altar began to buckle and groan. The altar itself tilted precariously, the pulsating skullstone sliding towards the newly formed chasm. The violet light intensified blindingly, the heartbeat sound becoming a continuous, deafening roar. The walls, the carvings weren't just glowing now, they were moving. The intricate patterns detached from the stone, swirling like a vortex of pure purple energy, converging towards the collapsing center of the room. The creature managed to haul itself partly out of the hole, its red eyes burning with hatred, ignoring the crumbling floor as it reached for me again. But it was too late. The entire floor around the altar imploded downwards with a sound like tearing reality, taking the altar, the skullstone, and the shrieking, shadow-faced creature with it into a swirling vortex of violet light and utter darkness below. The shockwave threw me backwards, slamming me against the tunnel entrance wall. Dust and stone fragments rained down. The oil lamps were extinguished, plunging the chamber into near-total darkness, save for the residual, fading violet glow from the chasm and the faint light filtering from the tunnel behind me, the tunnel where the hum had originated. Gasping, bruised, ears ringing, I pushed myself up. The chamber floor was gone, replaced by a gaping, dark pit edged with shattered, faintly glowing stone. The violet light within the pit faded rapidly, the roar subsiding back into an echoing silence. The ritual, whatever it was, had failed, or perhaps ended in a way no one intended. My only escape was the tunnel behind me. Turning, I faced the passage from which the intense hum had emanated moments before. It was darker than the entrance tunnel, the air still carrying a faint metallic taste, a residue of ozone. The silence here felt different, not empty, but watchful. Clutching the wrench, I took a hesitant step into the new passage. It sloped gently upwards, unlike the steep descent I'd taken earlier. The walls were smoother here, almost polished in places, and disturbingly warm to the touch. The rhythmic chink, chink, chink sound was gone, replaced by a very faint, high-pitched whine, almost too high for human hearing, that seemed to come from deep within the rock itself. I moved forward, every nerve screaming. What had caused that hum? What ancient power lay dormant here, disturbed by the ritual, or by my interruption of it? Was I walking towards the source? The tunnel curved gently, the high-pitched whine growing marginally louder. Then, the warmth intensified. The air grew thick, humid, carrying a strange, sweet scent, like overripe fruit mixed with electricity. And the tunnel opened into another chamber. This one was vast, far larger than the ritual chamber, cathedral-like in scale. And it wasn't dark. Strange, bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls and ceiling, casting an ethereal, shifting blue-green light across the space. Water trickled down the walls, pooling on the floor before disappearing into unseen fissures. But the source of the heat, the smell, and the high-pitched whine was immediately apparent. In the center of the cavern, embedded partially within the rock floor as if it had crashed there eons ago, was a massive, non-Euclidean structure. It defied easy description, all impossible angles, shifting planes, and surfaces that seemed to absorb and refract the fungal light in disturbing ways. It hummed, not mechanically, but with a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the floor, the source of the sound I'd heard earlier. Parts of it glowed faintly with internal energy. Wires or tendrils snaked from it, burrowing into the surrounding rock. It looked utterly alien. A machine? A vessel? A being? I couldn't tell. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that this was the source of the lighthouse's wrongness, the heart of Blackwood Point's ancient mystery. And I had the terrifying feeling it was aware of my presence. Awe and terror warred within me, rendering me motionless at the tunnel's entrance. The sheer scale of the cavern, illuminated by the ghostly shifting patterns of the bioluminescent fungi, was breathtaking. But the structure, it pulsed with a silent, ancient power that felt utterly inimical to human life. The high-pitched whine burrowed into my skull, no longer just a sound but a physical pressure. The sweet, cloying smell of ozone and decay was thicker here, catching in the back of my throat. My eyes traced the impossible geometry of the thing. Surfaces shifted, angles resolved and dissolved, making it difficult to gauge its true size or shape. It seemed simultaneously organic and artificial, a biomechanical nightmare half buried in the rock. The tendrils snaking into the cavern walls pulsed faintly with the same internal energy that made the main body hum. Was it drawing power from the earth? Or feeding something into it? As I watched, mesmerized and horrified, one of the glowing fungal patches near the structure flared brighter, then dimmed. Then another, closer to me. Was it reacting to my presence? The high-pitched whine seemed to modulate slightly, a subtle shift in frequency that scraped along my nerves. It knew I was here. Keeping low, using a large, fungus-covered stalagmite for cover, I scanned the rest of the cavern. The floor sloped down towards the structure, scattered with loose rocks and shallow pools of trickling water. Near the base of the alien machine, almost obscured by a thick cluster of glowing blue fungi, was something else. Not rock. Something pale. My blood ran cold. Bones. Human bones, scattered haphazardly near one of the points where a thick tendril entered the rock floor. Ribs, vertebrae, a femur, and a skull, lying on its side, empty eye sockets staring blankly towards the humming structure. How many people had met their end down here? Were these victims of the lighthouse creatures? Or sacrifices to this thing? Then, another detail caught my eye. Near the scattered bones lay a rusted metal object. A lantern, similar in design to the oil lamps in the ritual chamber, but larger, heavier, like something a lighthouse keeper might carry. And beside it, half buried in the damp earth, was a small, leather-bound book. A logbook? Another one? Compelled by a desperate need for answers, I began to move, circling the cavern's edge, staying in the deepest shadows, using the natural rock formations and fungal clusters for cover. The structure remained the focal point, its low thrum a constant, oppressive presence. The high-pitched whine seemed to follow me, shifting direction as I moved, confirming its awareness. Reaching the area with the bones, the smell was stronger, not just damp earth, but the faint, unmistakable scent of old decay. The bones looked ancient, brittle, stained dark by minerals. I carefully picked up the lantern. Heavy, rusted solid. Then, the book. It wasn't a logbook. The leather cover was bare, unmarked. It felt strangely cold to the touch, despite the cavern's humidity. Opening it was a mistake. The pages weren't paper, but some thin, flexible material that felt unnervingly like preserved skin. And they weren't filled with writing, but with more of those disturbing, intricate carvings I'd seen in the ritual chamber. Page after page of swirling, angular patterns that seemed to shift and writhe under the dim fungal light, inducing a fresh wave of vertigo. They felt less like symbols and more like schematics, star charts, or instructions for something utterly alien. As I flipped through the skin-like pages, a particular carving caught my eye. It depicted the humming structure in the center of the cavern, surrounded by smaller symbols. Radiating outwards from the structure were lines connecting to another, highly stylized symbol, a tall, tower-like shape with a single, burning eye at its peak. The lighthouse. This thing wasn't just under the lighthouse. It was connected to it. Powered by it. Or powering it. The logbook's frantic warnings about keeping the light burning bright took on a terrifying new meaning. Suddenly, the high-pitched whine from the structure spiked, becoming an ear-splitting shriek that vibrated through my bones. The fungal lights flared violently, casting strobe-like, disorienting patterns across the cavern. The structure itself seemed to pulse, its internal glow intensifying. The tendrils burrowing into the rock writhed like agitated snakes. It was reacting. Reacting to me. Reacting to the book. Dropping the book as if burned, I scrambled backwards. The shrieking whine modulated, lowering slightly, but the resonant thrumming intensified, shaking the ground. Dust and small pebbles rained down from the cavern ceiling. Then, one of the thick tendrils nearest to me began to move. Not just pulsing, but deliberately withdrawing from the rock wall with a wet, sucking sound. It lifted, snake-like, dripping dark fluid, its tip forming into a sharp, crystalline point that glowed with condensed energy. And it turned, slowly, inexorably, towards me. There was nowhere left to run. The crystalline tip of the tendril glowed brighter, humming with contained energy. It hovered in the air like the head of a viper, aimed directly at my chest. Flight was impossible, the cavern offered no easy exit back the way I came, and moving deeper felt like suicide. My only weapon was the heavy pipe wrench, useless against something that felt less like flesh and more like energized technology. Think. What did I have? The wrench. The cold, skin-like book lying near the bones. The bones themselves. The fungal light pulsed erratically, casting shifting shadows, making it hard to judge distance. The high-pitched whine continued its assault on my senses, making coherent thought difficult. The tendril lashed out. Not with physical speed, but with a burst of pure energy, a concentrated beam of the same sickly green light that emanated from the Foghorn gauge shot towards me. I reacted purely on instinct, diving sideways behind the largest cluster of bones and the rusted lantern. The beam struck the cavern wall where I'd been standing. There was no explosion, no impact sound, just a sudden, localized disintegration. The rock simply ceased to exist, crumbling silently into fine dust, leaving a perfectly smooth, slightly concave indentation glowing faintly green before fading. My mind reeled. That wasn't heat or force, it was something else, something that unraveled matter itself. The tendril retracted slightly, then began to sweep the area, the glowing tip searching. The high-pitched whine intensified again, feeling like needles probing my brain. It knew I was still here. It was hunting. I pressed myself flat against the damp earth behind the pitiful cover of ancient bones, wrench clutched uselessly. The green beam swept past, disintegrating a patch of glowing fungus inches from my head. The sweet, cloying smell intensified momentarily. I couldn't stay here. The bones offered no real protection. My eyes darted back towards the alien book. It lay open where I'd dropped it, its skin-like pages strangely unharmed by the ambient energy. The complex carving seemed to almost absorb the shifting fungal light. The carving of the lighthouse, the connection. Keep the light on. At all costs. Was the lighthouse beam not just a deterrent, but somehow, related to this structure? A power source? A control mechanism? A prison? The tendril paused, hovering directly over my hiding spot. I could feel a faint warmth radiating from its tip, could hear the low thrum of its internal energy. It knew exactly where I was. In a final, desperate gamble, I reached out, not for the wrench, but for the skull lying amongst the bones. It felt brittle, ancient. As the tendril began to lower, its green tip flaring, I heaved the skull upwards, throwing it with all my might not at the tendril, but towards the main body of the structure. My aim was poor, hampered by my injured shoulder and prone position. The skull sailed through the air and struck one of the structure's shifting, non-Euclidean surfaces with a clatter. It didn't damage it, didn't even leave a mark. But the reaction was immediate and violent. The entire structure pulsed with blinding white light. The high-pitched whine became a deafening, multi-frequency shriek that felt like it was tearing my synapses apart. The tendril aimed at me snapped back towards the main body as if recoiling in pain or shock. All the fungal lights in the cavern flared simultaneously, burning with intense blue-white energy, then extinguished, plunging the vast space into absolute, suffocating darkness. The resonant thrumming ceased. The shrieking whine died. Silence. And blackness so complete it felt like a physical weight. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. I couldn't hear anything over the ringing in my ears. Had I damaged it? Confused it? Or just angered it on an unimaginable scale? I lay there in the crushing dark, paralyzed by uncertainty. Minutes passed. The ringing in my ears slowly subsided, replaced by the sound of my own frantic heartbeat and the gentle, constant trickle of water somewhere in the cavern. No hum. No whine. No sign of the tendril. Slowly, cautiously, I began to push myself up. My eyes strained against the blackness, but there was nothing, not even the faintest residual glow. Had the structure shut down? Gone dormant? Feeling my way blindly, I retrieved the pipe wrench. My other hand swept the ground, searching for the alien book. My fingers brushed against its cold, leathery cover. I hesitated, then tucked it inside my ripped jacket. Answers. I needed answers, and this felt like the only clue I had. Which way was out? I tried to reorient myself based on the trickling water sound and the slope of the floor. The tunnel I'd entered from felt like it was, that way. Shuffling cautiously, one hand trailing against the cavern wall, the other holding the wrench out before me, I began to move towards where I hoped the exit passage lay. The silence felt wrong, fragile. After the overwhelming sensory assault, this absolute quiet felt like the precursor to something even worse. My foot slipped on loose gravel. I caught myself, heart leaping into my throat. And then I heard it. Not the hum, not the whine. But a soft, wet, slithering sound. Close by. And getting closer. It hadn't shut down. It had just changed tactics. And now, I was blind.